Okay, let me turn this one off so we don't get reverb.
Okay.
I don't know why. All right, let's get that right there. So bats drink water. So if you have open ponds, if they're not full of vegetation, don't be surprised some night if you have a bat fly through and take a drink of water from your pond. So if you do have bats doing that, try not to use any chemicals in there because the bats won't like that. It's not a good outcome for them. And since I'm talking to you all tonight, the first slide I want to show you is a what I call a nature Rorschach test. So I want you to look at that image, and I'm going to give you about 20 seconds to look at it and see if you can figure out what that is. The only thing I'll tell you is that it's an aquatic insect, or it's an aquatic organism. And if you have a guess, just shout it out. Yes, it is. Who said that? Very well done. I took this picture on the right of a turtle that was just had its head above the water with a reflection, and I happened to turn it the other way, and I thought, well, that's kind of pretty. So I thought it turned into artwork when I turned it sideways. You're the first person out of about 300 people that's got it right. Just so you know. With these kind of things, I'm always worried if I'm insulting people or not, so I'm glad somebody got it. And once you see it, once you see the head of the turtle, you can't unsee it, right? Yeah, okay. All right, so let me tell you a little bit about what I do with Texas Parks and Wildlife. I'm part of the Community Stewardship and Engagement Program. There are two of us. My colleague Wendy works out of Austin. I work out of Boerne. And what we try to do is engage citizen scientists to help us out with logging the flora and fauna of the state of Texas. So we use the tool iNaturalist, encourage people to use iNaturalist, take pictures of the plants and animals they see, share that information, and then we go after specific parts of that information focused on species of greatest conservation need, also known as SGCN. So an SGCN, just so you all know, is a species of greatest conservation need is a native plant or animal that is declining or rare and in need of attention to recover or to prevent the need to list under state or federal regulations. And in the state of Texas currently, we have more than 1,000 species of plants and animals that are listed as SGCN. And some of them are extraordinarily rare. Some of them are becoming rare, more rare. But they are all species that we're concerned about their status in the state of Texas. And one of the things that should be obvious to everyone, the more diversity we have in the natural world, the better the natural world actually works and functions. And when we start talking about bats, we have about 30, people debate, but basically 30 species of bats that can be regularly seen in Texas. Of those, 22 of them are now considered SGCN. And part of that challenge is that bats are facing a lot of challenges right now. And just to kind of go through that, a national report on the state of bats in North America, we know that they provide enormous economic benefits, including eating insects, reducing pesticide use as a result of that. Nectar feeding bats provide plant pollination. If any of you like tequila, thank a bat. Just saying. The bat tourism, you're all familiar with what happens here in Austin, down there on the bridge in the summertime. And then scientific advancement, all kinds of scientific research has resulted in advancements for us in terms of health and wellness. Right now, in North America, 52% are at risk of decline, 82% are being impacted by climate change, and 98%, virtually all of them, are losing habitat. And habitat loss is really the driving force for most declines in plants and animals globally. And those threats include everything from severe drought to temperature extremes, destruction of bat roosts, consumption of poisoned prey that builds up in their body and eventually kills them, mortality from wind turbines. I know that people want to go to clean energy. Clean energy has a cost beyond the cost of the actual turbine. It actually also, in some cases, kills especially birds and bats. So there's challenges there. And then the big thing that's really having an impact in much of North America is a disease called white nose syndrome. White nose syndrome is caused by this thing called Pseudogymnoascus destructans. I'm not going to say that 3 times because my tongue will get in a knot and then the program will be over. But it's a fungal disease that came into the United States from Europe. It's been in Europe for a long time. The bats there have adapted to it. It was novel for our bats. What happens is that this fungus gets on hibernating bats. It starts to eat away at the bat's nose and wings. It causes an irritation, an itching. The bats wake up out of hibernation. And because it's the middle of winter, there are no insects to eat. They use up the stored fat that they would have survived the winter on. And within 2 years, 100% of that cave colony is dead. And because bats are long-lived, anywhere from 10 to 15 years, and most of them have 1 baby per year with 50% mortality, you can imagine if you start with 2 bats brand new in a cave, it's going to take a while to get back to 100. Okay? So that's one of the big scary parts about all this thing. In Texas, it was first discovered in 2017, and then in 2018, a colleague and myself actually found spores on Mexican free-tail bats. Even though, because Mexican free-tail bats are not hibernators, it doesn't seem to have an impact on them, although they can spread the spores from cave to cave. It's been found in at least 21 counties. As you're going to see a map pretty soon, it's actually been found in a lot more. 2 of our bats, the cave myotis and the tricolored bat. The tricolored bat's theoretically, is about to be declared an endangered species by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The cave myotis is now has dropped in populations in Texas because it is a hibernating bat. We've had bat caves throughout the hill country where they've had some mass die-offs back in 1920, 21. And so there's a large concern about how both of these species are going to survive this new disease. I'm going to see if this plays. I don't know if this is going to play, but you can see that X on the map. Hopefully that's where it was first found. And if this plays, there we go. You should start to see, hopefully, did it play? Is it going to play? Come on, you can play. There it is. Maybe I have to keep pushing it. You can see the spread of it across the country, down through the Appalachians, up into Canada, across into the Ozarks, across the northern half of the United States. There it is in Texas now. And it made it all the way to the West Coast. So this disease was fast spreading, and unfortunately, no sign of it letting up right now. All right, and so in Texas, the first detection again was in the Panhandle, the second detection in Kendall County, and now you can see kind of the spread across the state of Texas. So if there are caves and there are bats, they're starting to find it. 4 species at least are now carrying the fungus. And 1 species, the tricolored bat, has been found with white nose syndrome. So lots of challenges that we're having with the bats. Now that said, I don't want to depress you for the whole night. So let's talk about bats because they're really cool critters. First of all, bats are known as Chiroptera, which means hand wing. And you can see that they've got really long fingers for the size of their body. They've got 4 fingers just like us and a thumb on each hand. They've got 5 toes on each foot. You'll notice, however, the knees look like they are somehow torqued the wrong way, and it allows them to come into a cave and land upside down. And so the first time I ever saw this skeleton, I thought, that guy looks like he's been riding a horse for too long. So they are a little bit odd that way, and their feet are actually, like our feet go this way, their feet go that way, if you were looking at the bat. But the rest of them actually looks pretty human-like. Rib cage, clavicle, scapula, lots of the similar bones, just exaggerated in some cases. And of course, when we start talking about bats, to this day, there are still people that are scared to death of them, and sometimes for reasons, especially if they contract rabies, which means that, by the way, never handle a bat with your bare hands, live or dead. If you do find a bat, you should get it turned in, and if it's in your house, Make sure you're wearing, if you're going to remove it, get a net, scoop it up, take it outside and release it. Don't do when I was a kid, I worked at a pharmacy in Iowa, and we had a bat, and I didn't know anything about bats at the time, except they were pretty cool, and it was on the back of the pharmacy wall, and the guy took a broom, and I mean, beat it until there was almost nothing left. That's not really the way to treat bats, but that was 50 years ago or whatever it is. But do be careful around that. Don't be like that Spurs basketball player that swatted one out of the sky during a game and then had to go get all the rabies shots. Ginobili, that was his name. People might have thought that was cool, but it didn't pay out very well for him, although he's fine. So, and I love this cartoon. Folks, this is Captain, please calm down. It's only a bat. Ah, get off me, get off me. So freaking everybody out. But there are a lot of bat myths. A lot of people still think bats are blind because they fly out at night. Why do they need eyes? Not true. They can see as well as we can, if not better. Bats get tangled in your hair. Maybe back in the day when women wear those big giant hairdos, I don't know. Or if you stood in front of a tiny opening with bats coming out, well, maybe one would get stuck in your hair, but who would do that? So bats can actually detect a human hair with their echolocation. Okay? So the chances of them flying and getting stuck in your hair are pretty minimal. All bats are vampires. Some people still think all bats are vampire bats and suck your blood. There's only 4 species globally, and none of them currently are in the United States. Some people think that they are mice, just flying mice. Turns out mice are rodents, bats are predatory mammals with very sharp teeth. And that all bats have rabies, and the fact is, if you were to go to the CDC and look at the statistics for rabies in bats, it would be a high number, because if you find a sick bat and you take it in, most bats aren't usually laying on the ground in the middle of the day, and that probably is an indication of illness. But in the wild, it's less than 1/10 of 1%. So it's a very tiny, tiny percent. If they're flying around, chances are they're healthy. So bat facts. Bats are mammals, the only mammals capable of true powered flight. Nearly 25% of all mammals are bats. The only group that has more species are what? Of mammals. What would you guess? Well, rodents, yeah, rodents. It's the only one that they outnumber everything except rodents. Most only give birth to 1 pup a year, as I mentioned. They can live a long time, 10 to 13, 15 years. The oldest one was recorded at 41, yes.
You said 25%, is that species or individual?
All species.
All species.
Yes, species, by species, yes. But in terms of individuals, the largest concentration of mammals on the earth is where? Bracken Cave in San Antonio. 20 to 30 million, depending on the estimates. Yeah. Largest concentration of if you take out the human species. They also are very clean animals. If you're under the bridge, you might go, wow, it stinks. There's a specific odor, right? Which I actually think is kind of nice, actually. For some reason, don't ask me why. I don't think skunk smells good, but bat odor is kind of interesting. But they carefully groom themselves. They're very clean animals, so they're not nasty things that might be portrayed in a movie or something like that. And they are at least 50 million years old in terms of their evolution. All right, at least 1,116 species of bats globally. And I say at least because that number seems to change periodically when they find a new species. The only place they're not found are on a few islands and on the poles, North and South Pole. When we talk about bats, there are large bats and there are small bats. And so the small bats are called Megachiroptera, and or Microchiroptera, and the large bats are called Megachiroptera. Makes sense? Microbats are the bats that we have here in Texas. The smallest one is the bumblebee bat in that guy's hand. All of those species echolocate, and they're kind of cute, actually. Megabats, of which there are 186 species, are in the tropics and subtropical regions. Most of them do not echolocate because most of them are eating what? Fruit. And you don't have to chase fruit. All right? And the wingspan of some of these bats can approach a few feet. The largest one is about 6 feet, so that would be a wingspan like this. And probably historically, back in the day, they were probably bigger than that. So when you look at a bat, there's lots of body parts. There will be a test on this at the end of the program. So hold your questions and thoughts. But they are basically flying wings with a little tiny body. And this is their wing. It's just skin stretched between their fingers, just like we have here, but not quite to that extreme, of course. That is some of the fastest healing tissue of any animal on Earth. In terms of if it gets cut or something like that, it can heal very rapidly. And then they have these other weird things. They've got these things called nose leafs and a tragus. And you'll notice their ear also has all kinds of weird shapes to it. That's what helps direct this echolocation calls first out into the environment. And then when the response comes back, it helps focus it into their ears so that they can detect where their prey is located. There are a few odd examples. There's the Chapin's free-tailed bat from Australia. Kind of a neat hairdo. I actually wanted that when I was a kid, but my parents wouldn't go with it. You know, I was from Iowa, I was pretty conservative. Here's the Australian ghost-faced bat, which is just a freaky looking thing. It looks like a rabbit. And then there's the spotted bat. This bat lives in Texas. It's black and white, and then has these enormous ears for catching little tiny bugs. And then just to show you that some bats are cute, there's a cute little flying fox. With little ears, that's right. They don't echolocate, right? Okay. So let's talk a little bit about echolocation. Echolocation is emitting of high-frequency sounds, most of which we never hear. That call can extend out about 65 feet. They're used for navigation, avoiding obstacles, capturing prey. And when they send those calls out and get them back, and we're talking milliseconds, both ways, they can determine the distance, direction, velocity, shape, size, and texture of the prey by that sound wave. That's what I said the first time I heard that. Wow. In terms of the pulses, they vary. I'll show you a couple of examples of actual pulses that we've recorded. But they normally are about 5 pulses per second, but when they're getting close to their prey, it can increase to 200 pulses per second, known as a feeding buzz. And of course, typically the bats with small ears use high-frequency sounds to capture small prey. Bats with the larger ears are usually using low-frequency sounds in the kilohertz range to capture larger prey. So this is what, on a software that analyzes bat calls, this is what you would see. And all of those little green shapes are individual bat calls. And that's that individual one we highlighted. When we go to try to analyze what bat species is making that call, we're looking at individual characteristics of individual calls. But when they're making those calls, we're looking for what are known as search calls. Those are the steady ones, pretty equidistant apart. And then you'll notice that through the whole process, though, as they get closer to prey, the number of pulses, as I mentioned earlier, go up and get very fast into what's called a feeding buzz. And if you're actually listening to that through a bat detector, it sounds like a really fast buzz and then a pop, literally a pop. And that's when they've captured the insect. And then they go back into the search phase. And so we do our analysis on the search phase. And unfortunately, I'm hoping this will play, but okay, hang on. Do you hear that? Okay, keep listening. That was a little farther away. Closing in on the insect. Dead insect. Basically what that tells you. I just find that kind of cool. And just so you know, different bats have different frequency calls. So these are on the left side, that's kilohertz. So this one, the hoary bat, comes down to around 20 kilohertz. The tricolored bat has a much different range to its call. So it goes from basically 40 kilohertz all the way up to 60. And then we have one bat called the ghost-faced bat here in Texas that instead of having that typical backwards J, it actually has taken the J and flipped it upside down and sideways. So the ghost-faced bat is one of our more unique bats in Texas. So if we continue on the sensory world of bats, hearing, their ears function basically as antenna. They also hear normal sounds, and their hearing may be as much as 10 times more sensitive than our hearing, depending on the species. Vision, they see very well. Megabats, the big ones, have eyes better than humans, as do owls, of course, for seeing in low light. And of course, they use their eyes just like we use our eyes to get around in the world. And in terms of smell, not the way they smell, but their sense of smell. They have a very good sense of smell. They also have unique odors. Some people say that if you go into a cave of Mexican free-tailed bats, they smell like corn tortillas. I don't know if that's true or not. I've been in those caves. I did not think corn tortilla when I was in there. So I don't know. The other thing that's kind of neat about their sense of smell is the way they find, when they have babies in a cave, there will be as many as 300 to 400 or more per square foot. Okay, so if you look down, if that square, each of these squares is a foot, imagine 300 to 500 bats in that square foot in a cave. So, and most of these babies are one per parent. When the parent comes in, they actually use their sense of smell and their ears to find their one unique baby, which is just amazing that they can do that in Mexican free-tailed bats. And of course, other things, there are many bats that are migrators, including the hoary bat, the eastern red, the northern yellow bat. The Brazilian free-tailed bat or Mexican free-tailed bat is here in the summer, has its babies. And then most of them, it used to be most all of them went back to Mexico for the winter to caves there. And now a lot of them are actually staying through the winter here because our winters have become milder and milder. And then, of course, a lot of bats actually hibernate, and those are the ones that are particularly vulnerable to white nose syndrome, as I mentioned. In terms of their diet, most bats eat insects, of course, a wide variety of insects, including mosquitoes, but not exclusively mosquitoes, but also fruit, nectar. We actually have 3 species of bats in Texas that are known to feed on nectar. One that is an insect eater was recently discovered by researchers after having caught a few of them in nets. Their muzzle was full of pollen from the desert plant called lechuguilla. So they're actually important pollinators of that particular native plant. And then there are those out there that eat frogs, fish, other bats, and blood. So they have a very wide variety of diets depending on the species. They are also eaten by a lot of things: hawks, owls, raccoons, cats, snakes, and even people. And then, of course, if a bat ever falls to the cave, of course, the caves are full of guano. The guano is actually very dry. It's the body parts of insects. But there are dermestid beetles that live in a cave, and they can skeletonize a bat in about 10 minutes. So if a young bat doesn't hold on or gets knocked off, the chances of it ever getting back up there is almost nil. I have a colleague that has a video of that, and I decided not to share that tonight, especially since you just had dinner. Bats, of course, roost in a lot of different places. This is an example of a cave wall at Old Tunnel State Park. All of that dark brown that you see there, those are bats. About 200 per square foot as adults. But they use caves, of course. They use rock crevices. Certain species will get under the eaves of houses or buildings. A lot of them will just rest individually on tree foliage. Found this resting on a plant, broad daylight, sound asleep. That's where it decided to hang out for the night, eastern red bat. Some of them will use tree bark or snags. This is a tricolored bat that was found in this cedar, was cut in this cedar tree. And of course, the bridges that you're all familiar with here in Austin. And just so you know, that emergence is somewhere around, 1.5 million, I think is a number I sometimes hear. So take that 1.5 million and multiply that by several times, and then you get Bracken. And so as beautiful as that emergence at the bridge is, if you ever get a chance to be down San Antonio and go to Bracken, it's something, plan for a couple of hours. It just goes on and on and on and on and on and on. You probably should wear a hat. just for obvious reasons. Now, in terms of bats in Texas, the Chihuahuan Desert area in West Texas has 27 species. The Edwards Plateau, where we are, 13. The more caves, the more rocks you have, the more chance you're going to have more diversity of bats. And distribution is influenced by lots of different things, obviously, as it is with everything else. So based on all of that, what I want to do is introduce you to a few of the bats that we have in our area, and then a few that aren't, but are unique for a certain reason. So I'm going to start with the smallest bat in Texas, called the canyon bat. It weighs 4 grams. That's my hand holding it. Its entire body was resting on my thumb. So you can imagine how small it is, okay? And yes, they bite, but they have really small teeth, so they don't break skin very easily. You shouldn't hold a bat with bare fingers, that's just what I'm saying. And clearly I was eating something that had red because some kind of red fruit or something. Maybe I was drinking some cactus lemonade or something like that. But they're found in West Texas, mainly in the Panhandle, but then down into and throughout the Chihuahuan Desert in West Texas. They're non-migratory. They're not active hibernators, so we think that they're not going to be as vulnerable to white nose syndrome as other species. And they often come out early in the dark, early in the evening. The bat that we have, that's the second smallest bat, called the tricolor bat, which I'll show you in a moment, also comes out in the early evening. And they're small size. They're usually around the edges of trees, gleaning insects from around there. They look like fluttering butterflies almost. So it's possible that those small bats that you might see just before it's pitch dark could be either this one, although here it's probably not the canyon bat, it's probably the tricolored, but it's worth looking at. The largest bat we have in the state is called the Western Mastiff bat. It has a wingspan of 19 to 20 or so inches. It's only found in a few caves along the Rio Grande. It's active year-round, and it emits sounds that sound like a cardinal call. And one time I was in West Texas and got to go down into a canyon at night by myself because there was a supposed colony down there, and when they came out, it scared me to death. They came by me and with all this harsh cardinal calling, and so after the thrill of that, as I was walking out of this canyon out in the middle of the desert, I was using my big spotlight and I flashed it on the mountain on the side, and a pair of eyeballs watched me for a very long time, and they weren't bats. To this day, I don't know what it was, but it watched me, and then the scary part was when I couldn't find the eyeballs anymore. But I made it back to the truck fairly quickly. Let's just say that. Another bat that's in West Texas, I just wanted to share it with you because it's got some enormous ears. It's called the Townsend's big-eared bat. In East Texas, we have the Raffinisk's big-eared bat, but they're a medium-sized bat. These guys are hibernators, so we worry about them with potentially with white nose syndrome. And they are very much a nocturnal bat coming out well after dark. One of the more spectacular bats in Texas is the pallid bat. This is the one that nobody ever knew that it fed on nectar, but now we know that it does. But it's also been famous for eating things like centipedes and scorpions. Pick them right off the ground. But it's a big bat, and I don't know if you can see it how well, and maybe the next picture will show it too. They have surprisingly sharp teeth. Why would they need to have such sharp teeth if they're eating insects? They got the chitin, the skin, right? The exoskeleton. They got to break through the exoskeleton. That's exactly right. Another bat that does live around here, those guys are just a little farther west of us, out in the hill country and the desert. We have the hoary bat. This is one of our migrating bats. Beautiful bat, has beautiful pelage. This is a bat that is in Texas part of the year, and then the females leave the state and go have their babies in the northern states. They roost in trees. Again, they are migratory, and they actually migrate north in the fall as opposed to birds coming south in the fall, kind of a reverse migration thing where then they spend the winters up there. But this is one of the bats that we're very especially concerned about with the wind turbines and how that's impacting their populations. And then probably our most common bat that we have around here is the eastern red bat. It roosts alone, as you saw in the previous picture. They're distributed clear across the state of Texas. Thank you. I meant to do that and I forgot. Pardon me. This bat, unlike a lot of bats that give birth to one, they give birth to up to 5 young. And so she's got 5 babies on her. Thank you. At one time. One time. So she's got to feed a lot to produce enough milk to feed those babies. So, but this is the bat. If you're ever around, like playing tennis court, on a tennis court, and of course you're not playing tennis, you're playing, what is it, pickleball? Probably. And you see bats flying around the lights. If you catch any of them that look kind of orangish, those will be the eastern red bats. And those lights are really great for attracting beetles and all kinds of things. And then another bat that used to be very common is the tricolored bat. It's called that because each hair is tricolored, actually. It's mostly a yellow bat with the yellow on the outside of the fur. These guys roost just about anywhere in caves, trees, crevices. They give birth to 2 babies, and each one weighs half of their mother. Now, of course, I've never given birth. I've heard stories of what it's like for humans. I can't imagine kicking out 2 babies, and that equals the whole weight of yourself. That's kind of, think about that. Just saying. And then another bat that, again, this is one of our bats that used to be very common and is becoming more and more rare. It's a year-round resident in Texas, the cave myotis. It often roosts separately, but in the same caves as Mexican free-tail bats. They usually emerge a little bit later, eat a lot of insects. When I used to do a lot of bat netting, this was the most common bat we would capture at ponds. And by the time we were done doing our research, we couldn't catch any of them. We just couldn't find them. So we've seen a significant decline in many ways because of that. Now, a few other bats that are also in this part of Texas include the big brown bat. And it's a medium-sized bat that is brown. So there you go. It occurs in most of probably the eastern 2/3, northeastern 2/3 of the state, including around here. It's a bat that oftentimes people find in a house, potentially, and it appears to be a beetle specialist. And we have this beautiful little bat called the silver-haired bat. It actually uses woodpecker holes in dead trees and similar places to roost. So if you have property and you have a tree die, if it's doing its thing out there and it's not affecting anybody, leave it, because that dead tree, actually dead trees will actually have more life in them probably after they're dead than they did when they were alive in some ways. So they can be very, very important. They are a migratory bat, and of course, again, they're another bat that's we think is being impacted by the wind generating systems out there. Another bat, they must have been running out of names, so they just called this an evening bat. And I think it's not, it's got little itty bitty eyes and a big old nose. It's kind of a homely looking thing. These are probably more common than we think. But look at this second fact. A colony of 300 evening bats was estimated to consume 6.3 million insects per summer, mostly eating those spotted cucumber beetles. So if you don't think bats are important for gardening and other things, boy, are they. But they also eat flying ants, spittlebugs, stink bugs, and small moths. So these bats are really important in controlling food supply, or insect populations out there that would otherwise would become intolerable in places, I'm guessing. And of course, our most common bat is the Brazilian or Mexican free-tailed bat. There's estimated to be about 100 million living in the hill country. And at Bracken, as I mentioned, it's the largest concentration in the world, somewhere between 20 and 30 million. It's recognized easily because its tail extends beyond the patagium, that skin that's around the tail, the base of the tail. They average about 40 large moths per night. So basically at Bracken, they estimate that these things can eat the equivalent of 15 to 20 elephants per night, the weight of 15 to 20 elephants. They can fly at heights of 10,000 feet. They can approach 100 miles an hour as they're coming back into their roosts in the morning. They're long distance travelers. So those bats that you see come out from under the bridge, they're heading out into the agricultural fields where they're feeding on their prey. A farmer's helper. By the way, this is a typical roost with lots of babies and one female. If you'll notice the look on the female's in the eyes, she looks a little freaked out. Because I don't know if all these babies are grabbing for her, but oh my gosh, crazy. And so one night, these guys they estimate about 250 tons of insects a night. So think about that. And the primary prey are the adults of this caterpillar. So I would prefer that I open up my ear of corn, shuck that thing, and not find one of these guys in it, right? And also know that it's the bats that kept them from getting in there as opposed to pesticides. And also cotton bollworm moths are a major prey item. So what it looks like inside Bracken Cave is this. All of the stuff that's brown, those are bats. And all the stuff brown down here, well, that would be the guano. The guano, of course, still is harvested. It's a great fertilizer, apparently. You can burn, it's very high, so you can burn your gardens too if you apply too much of it, but very, very in high demand sort of fertilizer for gardening. This cave, the one time I got to go in here, that I had to wear hip waders because the guano is not wet, so it's not gross, but you sink down to about your knees in it. So it's like, imagine walking through a big old snowdrift of guano. So anyway, yeah, it's an environment you gotta really want to be in. Now, just to show you, this is one of the, I think, two amazing things. So this is radar out of San Antonio. The orange over here to the right, that is the emergence of the moths at night from the agricultural fields of that part of Texas. That little red mark over there is beginning of a bat emergence. Notice the time, 6:04. That's 23 minutes later, that's bats. Wow. The moths don't stand a chance, do they? But this happens every night for months. Isn't that amazing? So there are things, of course, we can do to help bats. We can put up bat houses, but I will be honest with you, when you build a bat house and put it up, don't expect bats to just be waiting there, tapping their feet like, come on, get the thing up. Sometimes the bat houses never get used. Sometimes some bats find them. So educate yourself about that before you go and do that. But there are some historical records of huge bat houses being really well occupied by bats. Not every bat uses them, so that's another thing to keep in mind. And bats, because every night they have to go out and drink water, a bat house nearer water is going to have more likelihood of success than one in the middle of the woods, for example. And I'll just say that these guys, there's a lot of interest in here on bats right now. In fact, part of my job is working with Master Naturalist chapters across Texas. And we have a project going on right now where we have 36 chapters that this year we're using what are called acoustic monitors, because you just can't put up nets everywhere and expect to catch bats, and then you got to have the pre-rabies shots and all of that. These acoustic monitors have recorded hundreds of thousands of calls of bats from around the state, and even though we can never be 100% that call is that bat because we don't have the bat in the hand, their call characteristics are unique enough for a lot of them that we can get a good idea of what bats are living in a particular area. We have landowners all over the state that are participating in this research so that we can get a better understanding of where bats are currently located on the landscape. And Texas is actually behind the boat on that. A lot of states have done a lot more of that research. We're catching up now, and this is one of the largest at least with bats, probably the largest citizen science effort in the country right now with these detectors. So it's a pretty cool project, and it's going to give us a lot better, more up-to-date information on where these bats are across Texas. And then there's lots of places to go see. How many of you have gone to see the bats in Austin? Hopefully a lot of you. How many of you have gotten the chance to go to Bracken? Any of you gone to Old Tunnel State Park out in the hill country? Okay, it's a pretty good emergence, isn't it? Yeah, neat little place. But you can see there are places all over. Caprock Canyon State Park has a neat emergence at an old railroad tunnel. And then there's more, we're finding actually more and more bridges are hosting bats. In fact, my colleague Wendy has started another citizen science project in the Austin area where we have master naturalists who have been trained to go and look underneath bridges with lights and see if which bridges are actually hosting bats, bat roosts. And they're having some success. They're finding that more bridges are holding these. We're working in cooperation with TxDOT because obviously they're interested in what's going on with bats as well, because they are using some of those bridges, and it impacts their construction projects as well. If they have a roost of bats, they can't go in and destroy that roost. So knowing where those are, we're hoping to expand over the next several months down into the Houston area and then eventually into San Antonio and elsewhere. All right. That's what I've got. I don't know why those are there, so I'm going to escape. Oh, I know what I want to do. Hang on. We're not done yet. I need you to get out your cell phone if you want. Actually, that's not what I wanted. The current slide. Let's shoot through these slides real quick. Okay, see that thing right there? If you want to point your phone at it, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service asked our attendees at our programs to volunteer to collect some data on you, and I think that's your age range and male, female. It takes about 20 seconds to fill it out. Hopefully it works. Sometimes it doesn't on certain people's cell phones, but again, it's voluntary. I'll leave it up there. And then I'm going to leave you with a video that hopefully you will enjoy. And then we'll have some time for questions. And again, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Okay.
I got it.
Did you get it?
Yeah, I got the questionnaire.
Okay, there you go. So if you do want to complete it, though, I can leave it up here on my computer. You can come up and tap on it, too, a little bit later. But what I want to show you is this. This is a slow motion video taken by a colleague of mine, Lee Smith, down at Bracken Cave. We're going to hope that it plays. Oh, I forgot to tell you to start counting from left to right. Darn it. Oh, well. We'll do it another time.
And how big are these? Would you?
These are the Mexican free-tailed bats. So they've got a wingspan about like so. Okay. And this goes on for hours. And notice they start well before dark because there's so many bats in there. And when this starts up, before dark, all of a sudden you'll start seeing hawks and other birds of prey that are waiting for them and start hunting them. And they just pick them off. They fly down into the mass and pick one off. One time at Old Tunnel, I watched a great horned owl eat, I think it was 7 or 8 of them, and it only took about 15 to 20 seconds to go out, grab one, come back, eat it, go out and get another one. It was just one after the other.
Yeah, you can see some birds flying through.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. It's if you ever do get a chance to see that, it's one of the most amazing things, I think, on the earth. And we have it right here in Texas. Anyway, I want to thank you for the opportunity to talk to you about bats. Again, if you have ponds, if you have openings in the ponds, if you're sitting out there enjoying them in the evening, don't be surprised if you see something swoop through, and that's probably a bat taking a drink of water.
So they drink on the fly?
They drink on the fly, yeah, they sure do. And in fact, out in West Texas, they'll use water tanks, those aluminum water or metal water tanks, and sometimes bats will hit the water and they'll get stuck, or they'll land in the water, and they can drown in there. So they've actually trained or created these like little ladder-like structures that they just put on the edge of the pond so the bat can be swimming around in there and find that little ladder-like thing and then crawl up out of the water and dry off and fly off. So they do that regularly out in West Texas because of that. It happens enough. Yes?
I don't know what their mouth mouth structure is like, can they drink from a hummingbird feeder?
The nectar feeding bats, yeah, they got a long tongue.
Okay, so here in Austin, do we have,
No,
no?
no. So the only bats that are nectar feeders are down in the Big Bend area
Okay.
of Texas. Yes, sir.
I know there's this, I think it's called white nose syndrome, it's that
Yes.
stuff that gets on the nose. Is there any treatment for that, or?
Well, there's research trying to come up with treatments. The challenge is that to be able to treat individual bats in a cave with maybe hundreds or thousands is almost impossible. So what they've been, here in Texas, they've actually worked on, I don't know what the chemical is, but spraying it on the inside. They're usually doing tests of this in box culverts in the Houston area where tricolored bats overwinter, of spraying this material on the walls of the box culverts, which would kill the disease so the bats can survive and it's not toxic to the bats. The practicality of that, though, is probably low. And one of our leading bat biologists in the world is doesn't advocate for that. He thinks that the bats that survive, and they've got to adapt to the disease. Because if we try to treat every bat that's out there on the landscape, it's just not gonna, it's not practical. So the kinds of things they are doing is they're restricting people's access to caves because they think that somebody was a caver maybe, or even a bat researcher in Europe went into a cave, didn't know they had the spores on their clothing. Some of the spores fell off, survived, and that's the history of that. So restricting access, educating people to stay out of caves when there are caves in there hibernating, those kinds of things. If the researchers do go in there, they wear those white suits like they do at crime scenes, and then they throw those away afterwards so that they're not, if they have the spores on them, they're not spreading them around. So they're taking all the precautions they can, but there is starting to be some bits of evidence that a few of the bats in these caves are able to survive. And if that's the case and they can pass those genes on, that hopefully, like in Europe, the bats that do survive will be able to live with the disease, essentially. But the story is yet to be written. Yes, sir?
For your survey, you want us to put meeting oral presentation?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Yes, sir.
So, at Round Rock, on I-35, there's the bridge, well, with expansion of the highways and everything, sometimes they take the whole bridge out. Is the bat colony protected from that?
Well, so if they're going to do that, they generally have to wait until the bats are gone. So if there are no bats, it's kind of like swallows. You know those swallows that build those mud nests on the bridges? If they're actively nesting, they can't do any construction by law. So this happened in Bernie. They were doing a bridge construction near Bernie, had to shut it down for the summer until the swallows left. Once they're gone, then they can go in and do the construction. But to go in and it's not practical to move them, and they can't go in and destroy the colonies because bats are a protected species, just like birds
With
are.
the new bridge, do they come back?
Sometimes. You know the prison, there's a prison in East Texas. What's the big federal? Huntsville prison. There's an old building there that's had millions of them in it for years and years. And the prison wanted to tear the thing down because it was falling apart. They've been working on this for years, coming up with an agreement to put up a part of another structure or only tear down part of it and kind of stabilize the other half of it so the bats will use it. And it's been an ongoing challenge, but fortunately people are sitting down at the table and having conversations. So they're having some success. But yeah, bats will show up in a lot of different places. And those bridges, I do know there are a couple of places where the bridges were attracting bats, but it was a health hazard in terms of all the guano falling on trails, people were walking underneath. So they were able to extract, I don't know how they got rid of the bats. I don't think they pulled them out or anything. But when the bats were gone, then they put up something underneath in those slots so that the bats couldn't get in there anymore. So, yes.
I worked at this big office building on 45th Street, and they had bats that got into the parking garage,
Okay.
and they just kind of put stuff over, and they were trapped in there. And so I called the Bat Society people, and they came and saw and were really mad, and they, like, I think the people who owned the building got fined money, and then they put these things in place where, like, the bats could get out, they just couldn't.
They can't get
out.
back in, yeah.
Yeah.
People do that around houses sometimes. And those, you know, those ceramic tiles that are rounded on some people's houses, bats love to get up in underneath those, just so y'all know. But yeah, that was probably a lack of education. They probably didn't know. If that had been TxDOT, they would have never done anything like that. Yep, yep, they're a protected species,
But it
so.
was really sad, so it's like.
It is, it's,
You can't just trap all these bats. and
Right,
expect
right.
them to die.
Yeah. yeah. But, you know, not everybody thinks that way, so, you know.
Does the Texas Agricultural Commissioner promote any kind of cooperation with, I mean, I would think if I was a farmer, I would want to have bats living near my farm, if not on my farm. You know,
There, I know that down in the Uvalde area, in that agricultural area, that there are farmers down there and that actually have put up lots and lots of bat houses because it does help reduce the amount of chemical they have to use to spray their crops. I don't know if the farm commissioner, you know, if that person actually actively does that, I don't know. But I do know farmers, and they understand and appreciate the presence of these bats and what they do for them, so. Because, you know, if you can have natural control and not have to spend that money, what a deal. It's a good thing for all of us. Yes, sir.
So how much do pesticides affect bat population?
So I don't know that. I don't know the answer to that. But so if you think about back in the day, some of you are old enough to remember DDT and what it did to bald eagles and ospreys. And it's called bioaccumulation. So they would eat prey that had some in it. It would retain in the body. They'd eat another one, and it would just build up. Probably the same thing happens in bats. But bats are tiny little animals. So when bats die, most of us never ever see. I mean, how many of you have been walking around and found a dead bat? Any more than a dead songbird, you know, unless it hits your window. So it's hard to get those facts. I'm sure there's research out there where they've actually tested bats to see what kind of pesticide loads they're carrying, but I don't know the results of any of that research. So I'm sorry I can't answer that for you. Yes, sir.
Are they actually building bridges to try to attract that?
You know, for a while there was that one when they accidentally kind of discovered the bats were using those, that it has to be a certain those pillars, not pillars, whatever they're called, runners, whatever. Thank you, beams. There's a good word. Okay. Why use a logical word if you can come up with something weird? But they had to be a certain distance because that way the temperature and the humidity conditions were just right. And so as they were designing bridges, suddenly they found out bats loved this design. And I think that's happened. I can't tell you exactly if they've stopped making them of that design, but it's a good design. So it may be, because there are now bat bridges like that in Houston. You mentioned Round Rock, San Antonio. So there's enough of those bridges out on the landscape, at least ones that have already been built that are being used by them. And even around Bernie in the fall migration, it's not unusual if I go down, get on the Interstate 10 early in the morning, I'll see bats in the migratory period. There'll be bats funneling into bridges all along 10. Almost every bridge that you go under will have bats going into them. So they get used a lot. All right. Thank you all very much for the opportunity to speak with you.